Well, good morning, everyone. If you are watching this on YouTube or if you're at home, I would just ask that you would stop the video, that you would go to John chapter 12, and I would ask that you would read verses 1 all the way down through verse 29 before continuing with the message. Inside the church, right, you've had that gospel reading of verses 12 through 30. And so again, in John, this is a big story, right? It's a long chapter with a long story. So to break that up a little bit, part of it in the church we do is the gospel reading. And at home, I would ask that you stop and read those. So if you do so now, and we'll continue on with the message. So this week is Palm Sunday, right? Or as we like to call it as Christians, is Palm Sunday, or it's the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem before the Passover. So we got to set some introductory offers and kind of give a timeline of what's going on. So at this point in time, we know that Jesus is off somewhere in the wilderness. He's not in Jerusalem. He's not in Bethany. He's somewhere else. And that the men of Israel, and sometimes their families, right, they started making their way to Jerusalem so that they can receive their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. Okay, so Jerusalem is starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger as people are coming into Jerusalem. And we also know that there's men gathered around the temple area, and they're asking the question, where's Jesus? Do you think he's going to show up? And the Pharisees are telling people, the Pharisees and chief priests, right, they're telling people, if you know where he is, we need to know, right? They want to arrest him. So we got two conflicting things here. They all know that the chief priests and Pharisees are looking for Jesus, and they want to know where he is. And so that's kind of our setting of what's going on. Right, our timeline is at the beginning of chapter 12. Verse 1, it says that 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany. Right, so as people are getting into town and getting to Jerusalem, getting ready for their cleansing and wondering if he's going to show up, right, the Pharisees are looking for him as well. Jesus and the disciples go to Bethany. Remember the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And it says there in the reading that there was a meal served there in honor of Jesus, and that Martha served that meal. And that speaks a lot to Martha again, as we talked about last week. And it says that Lazarus reclined with Jesus, and that Mary then washes Jesus's feet with perfume, right? It says that she poured it over his feet, a very expensive perfume, and washed it with her hair. When this happens, Judas isn't happy about it, and Jesus says to leave her alone. In fact, in verse 7 of John chapter 12, it says, "Leave her alone." Jesus replied, "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." So Jesus again is making reference to the fact that he's going to be leaving them. And this is important to know, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But as we finish out that section of the chapter, which would be verses 9 through 11, it says that large crowds have now heard that Jesus is in Bethany at Mary and Martha's house, and so they go out there, right? They go out to see him, and they also go out to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the people that have made pilgrims up to Jerusalem, right, they're getting ready to do their ceremony cleansing. All of a sudden, they're wondering where he is, and somebody lets it spill that we saw Jesus go to the village in Bethany, and they went in and they started this rumor and said he's there. And so all these people start leaving Jerusalem and going out to Bethany, about a 2-mile walk, because they want to see Jesus, but they also want to see the man that he raised from the dead. Verse 10 tells us, so the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. right? Because this miracle was a big deal. The raising of the dead was a big deal. It was one of the messianic prophecies from the Old Testament that the Messiah would raise people from the dead. And so combined with all the other miracles, all the other things that have happened, they're going out to Bethany because they want to see him and the maiden raised up. But also notice that the Pharisees don't want to just kill Jesus now. They also want to kill Lazarus. These are supposed to be men of God. Go figure. Now we get to John chapter 12, verses 12 through 19. Now this is kind of its own section, and this is what we're celebrating today is Palm Sunday. Right? Jesus' entrance into the city, right? We started, it was 6 days before, so now 5 days before the Passover. The next day, it says in verse 12, the great crowd that had come for the feast heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. Right? So I see this as ancient instant messaging. Right? Jesus and his disciples and some people that are kind of hanging on leave the house and they start making their way to Jerusalem. And this is where I see the little kids running forward. Right? Or people running into Jerusalem going, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming. Right? They're letting everybody know he's coming. Right? Instant messaging of the day, as instant as it could be for as fast as they could get there. And so people, excuse me, gather up palm branches and they welcome him to town. Right? The big triumphal into Jerusalem. Gonna grab this drink of water real quick. So as Jesus comes, they get these palm branches and they start waving them as he's coming, right? Palm branches are a sign of victory. John also writes about palm branches in Revelation, that he sees many in Revelation chapter 7 waving palm branches, right? This was an ancient tradition that when they got victory, they'd wave and they'd praise God with the palm branches for the victory that they had received. And they're shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. Jesus found a young donkey and sat upon it. It is written, do not be afraid, O daughter of Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. That's from Zechariah 9:9. That when he enters in as the king, that he will be riding upon a donkey. Right? At this point, I'm just trying to set things up for everybody. Right? I want everybody to start seeing things a little bit differently. Right? We know all these things, right? The anticipation, is he going to come? They find out he's in Bethany, and all of a sudden he's going to come into the city, and it has told us that many of them have started to go over to him, that they have put their faith in him, that they have believed in him based on other miracles, and the miracle of Lazarus was kind of the final head on the nail to drive everything home. And now as he's coming in, they're proclaiming him king. Now let's think about this for a minute. What else is going on? Right, they're getting ready for Passover. Well, what happened over on Passover? What happened in the first Passover? Right, the first Passover is when God freed them from slavery from Egypt. Right? This is when Moses had come, and progressively the signs got greater that God had actually sent him. And he leads them out of Egypt. And Passover night was the night that they were to take a lamb and slaughter it and put the blood over the doorpost so that the firstborn of their households would not be killed. And he saved them. That's Passover. Right? When God moved in such a way that even Pharaoh could not withstand him. And he released God's people. So, as you're building up to Passover, where is your mind going? Right? If you're these Jewish people, What are you thinking about, right? Your heart's starting to center on those things of God. And the things that he's done, the things that they've been told and commanded, in fact, to celebrate for all eternity, their freedom from slavery from Egypt through the mighty hand of God. And there's all kinds of prophecies of the return of the Messiah, and we just read through 2 of them. And so their hearts are probably starting to think something along the lines of, it's Passover. We're pretty sure he's the Messiah. In fact, we're going to put our faith in him. He's coming to save us. And some of the things moving forward are going to really make you think the same thing. Right? If you put yourselves in the shoes of the common person, we're going to see those same things. And at the same time, the disciples are kind of confused. Right? Because he's made reference to his own death. In fact, in the book of Mark, 3 times before the triumphal entry, Jesus has predicted his death. 3 times in Matthew, before the triumphant entry, he has predicted his own death. We read that Mary has anointed his feet and washed them, and he says it's for his burial. So they're a little bit confused. What's going on? Right? He's telling us he's going to die, which we don't understand. And if you're not sure about that they don't understand, all we need to do is look at the story of the Transfiguration. Right after the Transfiguration in Mark 9:9, it says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Okay? They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. Right? They're trying to figure out what he means by that. Because surely if he's the Messiah, he's not going to die. So what does rising from the dead mean? Right? He's spoken in parables all over the place. And oftentimes we see that the disciples don't quite understand them. And we also have to remember when we read this, that this is John remembering what had happened, and now he has better understanding of what's to come. But in the moment of the triumphal entry, they're still not sure what these cryptic messages mean. They're still not sure that they understand that he's going to die, right? I think in their hearts, and Peter alludes to this at times, I don't think they think that's a reality or a possibility. And so when we read in verse 16, it says, at first his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that they had done these things to him. See, the disciples weren't quite understanding either. Jesus is telling them one thing, and he speaks in a lot of parables, and they're starting to wonder, is this also a parable about his death? What's really going on? And so as they move forward, we start seeing this anticipation of the announcement that Jesus has come to free people kind of grow. Right in verse 17, it says that, 17 through 19, it says that, now the people that were there, the Jews that were there when Lazarus was called out of the grave and raised from the dead, they went around telling people about this. Right? So those people who were witness to what Jesus had done, what they'd seen with their own eyes, how they'd changed their hearts into believing that he was the Messiah, right? They're walking around telling people. They're planting seeds. And more people are coming to believe in him. Verse 18 says, many people, because they had heard that he had given this miraculous sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him. Right? The Pharisees know that even though they are the ultimate authority, religious authority in the land, that they can't go and arrest him in broad daylight. Right? Think about the throng of people that are going to be around Jesus and all around him as he's moving through and going into the city and getting closer to the temple. The Pharisees know that they can't send anybody in there because if they go for him, there's going to be a riot. And so they have to change tact. Think about what you know that happens in the future. They need somebody on the inside so that they can get to him in the dark of night, not during the light of day. And so we see the fervor for Jesus growing as he goes into the city. Right, as we move on through the story, right? In verse 20 it says, "Now there were some Greeks among them who went up to worship at the feast." What are the Greeks, right? These are Gentiles who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. Or they at least wanted to meet him. I shouldn't say that they believed that he was the Messiah necessarily, because it doesn't necessarily say that. But either way, they've heard this commotion and they want to meet him. Now, the Greeks are Gentiles who are God-fearers. Right? If you read the book of Acts, you're going to hear reference to God-fearers a lot. God-fearers are those that believe in the monotheistic God of the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The God that we as Christians also believe in. But they don't want to convert to Judaism. So they're God-fearers. They're Gentiles who go to synagogue to hear about God. They believe in God, and so they've gone up for Passover. Well, why would they do that? In my mind, it's so that we can see things from their cultural perspective. They know that God has commanded that this festival be followed forever. And so they want to draw closer to God. Man, if God said this is something we should do, that the Jews should do, maybe there's something in it for me too. I should probably go there and see what this is all about, right? They want to draw closer to God and they want to understand him more. And when they hear all the fervor and the hubbub and they hear the testimony of the men and women who have seen him raise Lazarus from the dead, they also want to meet this Jesus. And so they go up to Philip and they ask Philip, "Hey, can we meet this guy?" And Philip isn't sure what to do because they've heard this story about him getting killed, but they've also thinking maybe he's going to be crowned king. And do these Gentiles want to get in there? Or who in the crowd might want to kill him? And I can't imagine what it was like to be a disciple at that point in time. They're going to be very protective of him. Right? We saw that last week when he wanted to go to Judea. And so Philip isn't sure what to do, and so he goes and speaks to Andrew, and these guys probably follow him. Right? They follow Philip, and they gets to Andrew, and he said, "Hey, these guys want to meet Jesus," and Jesus is there, and he says, "Okay, yeah. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Now that doesn't sound like death speak to me. I don't know about you, but when I'm talking about something being glorified, I'm not talking about it being killed. And so Jesus then speaks in parables once again, right? If a wheat seed dies, it goes into the ground, it grows, produces more wheat. Whoever loves his life in this world will lose it. Whoever hates his life in this world will receive it for all eternity. Right? Jesus is giving them spiritual platitudes, though they're not seeing them. All they see is the Son of Man being glorified, right? Because that's what men would see. And then he says in verse 27, "Now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Right now, We see that as knowing what happens afterwards. In this moment, they wouldn't know. And so this almost sounds like Jesus being humble. Right? What should I say? That I don't want to be king? What should I say? That I don't want to be glorified? What should I say? Because this is what I came for in the first place. Right? Perspective. We know what he meant by that saying. But these folks probably hear him saying, yeah, it's getting ready to happen. In fact, if we go past verse 30, after he says, Father, glorify your name, it says, then a voice came from heaven. It says, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Now all of a sudden, you hear him say these things about being glorified, and God answers them outright audibly. Right? Put yourself in your shoes. What do you think they're going to think? What do you think the disciples are going to think? I don't know what it meant to die, but it looks like he's going to be lifted up and glorified. In verse 30, Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of the world will be driven out. But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. Now, again, his words at the time would have made it sound like, now is the time for judgment on this world. The prince of this world will be driven out. What are they going to think? John adds the sentence at the end. But whenever Jesus says, when I'm lifted up from the earth, right, the writing in Greek means to be exalted. Right? We hear it, we read it, we see it as physically lifted up on the cross, but at the same time, this can be figuratively or physically exalted before men. What are the people hearing around him? Why is this making the Pharisees afraid? Because they think that Jesus is getting ready to overturn the world. And he is. Just not the way anybody's seeing it. In fact, the very next paragraph, we see that they're not even concerned about the fact that he says that he'll be lifted up, the people that are in the hearing. Right? It says, the crowd spoke up. We have heard from the law that the Christ will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? They don't say, what does it mean to be lifted up? They ask him, who is the Son of Man? Different perspective, right? Then Jesus told them, you are going to have a light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. The man who walks in the dark does not know where he is going. Put your trust in the light while you have it so that you may become sons of light. When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. Right? This whole thing we interpret as Christians. We never interpret it from the perspective of the common person that would have been there, walked through it. Right? Jesus, in his own way, in his parabolic way, tells them what's going to happen. But again, they're thinking about the physical reality of things as opposed to the spiritual reality of things. How often do we get caught in that same place? Right? We see the way it works. The people who witness what Jesus has done, what they have seen, what they've felt, what he's changed in their lives, they go out and they tell others, and it lifts other people up and it brings them to Christ. To a point that the darkness can't stand against it anymore, and it has to kind of change tactics. Right, I'm not going to read the rest of the story. But I do want to kind of touch on the main things that have to do with it. In verse 37, John tells us that even after Jesus had done all these miraculous signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. Right? We think of massive amounts of people, but he's really talking about mostly chief priests and Pharisees here. How do I know that? Well, when we get down to verse 42, it says, "Yet at the same time, many even among the leaders believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith, for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved praise from men more than praise from God." How many people in my line of work fall in with the ones who believe but don't want to be cast out? How many people that stand in my shoes or in your shoes as servants of God know the truth, but when the rubber hits the road, as our idioms go, they choose not to say. They choose not to stand up for Jesus. They choose not to stand up for God's word. This is a truth. It was a truth then, and it's a truth now. And as Christians, we need to love the praise from God more than we love praise from men. Will it get you in trouble? Yeah. But God didn't call us to always be peaceable. Right? God didn't call us to hide his word. He has called us to witness to the glory of Jesus Christ. He has called us to witness to who God is. Not to change his word, not to add to his word, not to take away from his word, but to speak his word. The final section, Jesus tells them exactly why he had come. I'm just going to read it, and we'll end there. Starting in verse 44, it says, "Then Jesus cried out, 'When a man believes in me, he does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. When he looks at me, he sees the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. As for the person who hears my word but does not keep them, I don't judge him. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. That very word which I spoke will condemn him at the last day. For I did not speak of my own accord, but the Father who sent me commanded me what to say and how to say it. I know that his command leads to eternal life, so whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say." Well, I hope this sermon has given you a different perspective, and I also hope that it causes you to sit down and think about Jesus' words. Well, praise be to God. I hope to see you all again next week on Easter Sunday. God bless.